Today I have an amazing guest. It's Judy Mann. And Judy Mann and I first became acquainted back in October, I believe. Judy is a volunteer coordinator, and I would call her a community ambassador because she has her thumb in so many pots. And Judy, I'm going to let you describe and explain all the different things that you're doing, besides running your own private full-time business, which is Pot of Gold, a florist that exists in Mystic, Connecticut.
It's actually in Stonington. It's Pot of Green, and it's in Stonington. It's a florist, right? We've been doing that for 49 years, and in addition to doing that, I have been on the board at the Soup Kitchen, which I still call the Soup Kitchen. It's New London Community Meal Center, but to me it's still the Soup Kitchen.
Sure.
And then I've been on the board at...
Your mic?
Where is it? I don't know what it looks like.
Okay. Here, scoot up. Oops, I guess you're sitting on it. Here you go.
And where do I put it? You put it. Do we start again? Is that how it works?
We'll just keep going. It's fine. Okay, so you work, you've been with the Soup Kitchen since...
Almost since its onset. Friends asked me to help, and that was when we were on Truman Street. It was a very small store then, and there was no back door. And I remember the first day I came, and this gentleman came in. He was intoxicated, and I called him a gentleman. I said, "You certainly are a gentleman. May I help you with something, sir?" No one's ever called me that before, and I don't like it. Right away, I started to hide, and I didn't know where to go because there was no back door. So I fit into a cabinet in the back, and I jumped into a cabinet and closed the door. That was my first visit.
That's hilarious.
Yes, and then we moved shortly thereafter, and we moved to Montauk Avenue.
Where we are now.
That's correct, and we bought the building.
Nice.
And that took a long, that was a long siege because we were associated with a church group. And Seventh-day Adventist group. And so we had to separate from them, so that we had to hire a lawyer, and one of the lawyers absolutely was on our board, which was very helpful. And so we did make the separation, and so we could sort of do more things being separate. And then we became incorporated, and we enlarged, and our board enlarged. At that time, Lori Bellinger and Lucille Smith were running it.
And those are the two ladies.
Those are the two ladies. It was really Lori, right? And she did it for years, and Lucille was her friend.
And they're the ones who are credited with starting the Soup
That's
Kitchen.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And then they were only having maybe 15 people a day. And Lori always did breakfast, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there were maybe 10 or 15 people at that time.
At each meal?
At each meal.
Wow.
It was very small. And the very funny thing is, when it got larger, Lori asked me, her mother was still alive. Now, she was in her late 70s, and her mother was still alive in New York. She wanted to take a bus and go see her. So she said, "Do you think you could take over the whole show while I'm gone?" And I think we had enlarged to maybe 25 people each meal. I said, oh, sure. Well, I did it for 10 days. And the interesting thing is, I needed a 2-week break after that. She was in her 70s and did it every single day. I was exhausted. Get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be there at 6 to make bacon and porridge and all sorts of things. I wasn't used to it. I have one child, my husband, myself, and my child. I didn't ever make big breakfasts. So it was very tough. And then Lori, later on, her mom died, and then she became ill with cancer. And so she had several children. Not many were available to help her. So what she would do is she would wait in her old van at the door until I came. And then I would, depending on how she felt, if I had to take her for treatment or not, I would either drive her home to Ledyard in my car, or follow her home, or let her go alone, and then I would run the show. So that's how it continued and continued. And then we got bigger, and then she asked me to be on the board. There were 4 people on the board. I think there were only 2 alive besides myself. And we tried to change things a little bit, and we stopped being open on Saturday night. We were actually open on Saturday evening for dinner. We stopped being open because Lori was just too worn out. And quite frankly, I couldn't find enough volunteers to work on Saturday night. But then I began a volunteer program, and I was able to get a hold of lots of people who were really interested in helping serve people who really needed the food. And that enlarged so that there are, I think for now, 420 volunteers.
Wow, so that's really grown. What was the volunteer base when it first began? Do you have any idea of that?
Volunteer base, myself and another woman.
Two people.
Two people.
So we've grown from two to
people.
420.
That's correct.
That's amazing.
That's correct. So it did grow as the people's needs grew, and we had to be open, and we had to make more food, and we had to find where we were going to get the food. So all of that was very important. And Lori was very, very religious, and she really used her Social Security and her husband's Social Security, although her husband had passed, to pay for a lot of the food.
Oh, God bless her,
because
right?
there was no way, there weren't grants then.
Right.
At least we weren't grants were not available to us then.
Right.
But people were wonderful about giving us money.
Sure.
So then I would go around to the different schools, all the churches, and speak. So here's a funny story. I went to a church in South Lyme. And I can't remember how it happened. So I spoke, or it was maybe before I spoke, and there was a gentleman who was dressed as someone who was homeless, unfortunately. And I could sort of tell that it was a put on because he had these very expensive shoes on. But they did explain to me what the plan was. They sat him in the congregation. It was a very small congregation. As a matter of fact, Walter Cronkite, I think, went to that church.
Interesting.
Very small church. I think it was Walter Cronkite, some person on TV, a commentator. So he was sitting in the audience, and everyone was sort of looking around because they were a real community, and they knew each other. And here was this gentleman who looked like he had maybe a wig on or something, and I hope he hears me, and he'll remember, being on. And so he sat there, and not one person went over to him after coffee. Not one person went over to him. Not one person asked him who he was. And that was very telling. And so I think those folks learned a lot from that. That when someone comes into a congregation or anywhere, into a group meeting, and you don't know them, it's important to welcome them in any way, whatever they're wearing, whatever they look like. So that was very telling. So I've been to almost every church, because the churches that we have, it's really because I went there and talked about the need. And so we have maybe 12 churches. We have New London. We have so many Rotaries. We have teachers groups. We have lawyers groups. We have a lawyers group. So we have so many interesting people. And it just kept growing and kept growing. And now, and you called me in October, whatever, and said that you were Cate and you were looking maybe to volunteer at the New London Community Meal Center. And of course I said, oh, you mean the soup kitchen, which, and you said yes, and I signed you up, and obviously you're happy being at the soup kitchen.
Right, and I've been doing it since November, because I think it was late October when you and I initially spoke, and you said, well, what day is good for you? And so we talked about that a little bit, and we settled on Wednesday. So Wednesday's been my day, and it's really grown. My son and my husband and my sister-in-law have come with me when they're in town. I think it's a really good experience.
And you're in a lovely group of two other women that you come with.
We call ourselves the Golden Girls.
And you've made friends there.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I tell people, it's not a social event, but you make some wonderful friends who feel the same way you do about these folks that need help so badly. And, being at the soup kitchen is an experience. It really is a wonderful experience.
Absolutely.
I have gotten to know so many people. Unfortunately, the rate of recidivism in hunger and homelessness is dreadful. I have seen the same people that are at the soup kitchen for years and years.
Oh, seriously?
And they'll always say to me, are you still here? And then I don't say to them, are you still here? But I think to myself, oh God, they are still here.
Couldn't there be a better program or something to help them too?
Exactly right. So for now, I volunteer. So at the pandemic, I decided I would stay away from the soup kitchen and the shelter.
Well, you want to stay safe.
My Monday night for years and years was go to the soup kitchen, work at the soup kitchen, close up with whomever was closing at that time. The security guard at that point was closing, and then I would travel over to the shelter, and I would work at the shelter until 7:30, 8:30, 9, and always bring food over. So you might say, well, didn't those folks come to the soup kitchen? They did, but some of them either didn't like if we were having a certain meal, or they were still hungry, or they were just getting out of work. A lot of homeless people work, whether people believe it or not. They just can't afford the rents and the security.
Of course.
So they're at the shelter, and they're hungry.
Well, of course, and minimum wage is very minimum.
Exactly.
And
Not enough for security and a rent. And so some of the folks were either getting out of a hospital or coming out of work, and so they would arrive at 7. The soup kitchen was closed, so I always brought food every single Monday.
Nice.
3 of my friends came, and between the 3 of us, we had a full meal.
Nice.
And I remember the first time I brought it, and this wonderful Michael Belt, who was the minister at St. James Episcopal Church, that we actually housed people. We used that as a shelter for many years.
But isn't that where the homeless hospitality center?
Not now.
Okay.
No, not now.
Okay.
We have our own place, but we were there initially. And I remember Michael Belt, and he said to me, he was the minister, he said to me, we never had so much garbage. Since you've come, we've got a ton of garbage. We've got to pay someone to take the garbage. And so with that, other people started bringing, not as much as me, I would say. They brought desserts. That was what we asked at the shelter, to bring just desserts, some cookies, like college kids would come with cookies that they would bake. But then church groups and the Coast Guard Academy and Mitchell College and Conn College, it grew there also, and they started bringing things. So almost every night was filled there. In the beginning, it was only my night when I came by myself there. Then I encouraged a couple of people to come with me.
Nice.
So someone that I met at the Y, she did not know me, but she knew there was an article about me in the Y bulletin board, and she had heard that we could use desserts. So she brought me brownies. So one day I asked the Y if they would give me her phone number, and I called her. She lived in Mystic, and I said, everyone raves about your brownies. Why don't you come with me? And 10 years later, she's still coming with me.
Nice.
So the first Sunday of every month, though, I do lunch at the shelter. And so this past Sunday was the first Sunday, and so I did lunch at the shelter. So 4 of us come. 2 of us actually serve, and 4 of us do something. So one brings the drinks and the chips, and the other person makes the salad, and the other person brings fruit and dessert. So we have a lunch. Because there is no lunch, we don't serve lunch from the New London Community Meal Center on Sunday. They do eat dinner at 5. But there's really no lunch. There's actually no breakfast, I don't think, on Sunday. During the week, there is a church that provides breakfast for people. And then, of course, during the week, we serve lunch. So we serve Monday through Friday, lunch and dinner. Saturday, other groups come and use the soup kitchen and use churches to do lunch. So there is a lunch on Saturday. Dinner used to be, when the pandemic came, the church of, like, Church of the Town, something, the Church of the City, I think it was, in downtown New London. Some church there was serving dinner on Saturday night, but with the pandemic, they stopped. So some people were without food from lunch on Saturday until sometimes lunch on Sunday.
Wow.
So few and far between. There was a church on Jefferson Avenue that also did breakfasts sometimes as well. So it's been nice finding volunteers and, going to all the churches and so forth, meeting people, and schools. I've gone to lots of schools and, of course, colleges. But I remember one school, they did a bicycle run. It was a primary school. It was young kids. And they were going to go around asking people if they would, give a donation if they rode a certain, 3 blocks, 4 blocks, 5 blocks.
Sweet.
And so, and then other people would call who were doing community service. And the police station in New London would tell them that they could do community service for whatever they did, certain things, at the soup kitchen. So we have a lot of community service people who are very helpful, and after they've done their community service, they also want to be a volunteer.
Yes.
Which is terrific. So
well, and sometimes we'll have people, some of our guests, they are recipients of our services, and they will come and they will want
do
to
the dishes.
help clean up.
Yes.
And I'm so impressed by that, because some of our guests are extremely polite, very gracious, could not be kinder. And then other people are, like you said, you're the first customer that you had
Right.
that didn't want you to call him sir or gentleman, and he was offended by that, and you had to go hide. So we do have a little bit, it's along the continuum of all of that kind of thing.
I really miss Sunday when I was at the shelter. I thought to myself, and I said it to my friend who came with me to serve. I said, I really miss the friendship and kindness of the people who come here.
Absolutely.
Because they are the first people who will give. If I give 3 cupcakes, because I have a lot of them, they will right away find somebody else to give it to.
Exactly.
They are the kindest people and the friendliest people.
Yes.
And they are so grateful and so appreciative. And it's just a pleasure being around other folks that I don't usually get to see unless I'm there or in the New London area or around a lot of people, because I'm stuck in my store a lot.
Well, and I think that circles run in circles, and you kind of stay with your own kind of thing, and so having that opportunity to mix with people that are different from you, different.
I love it.
Yeah,
I absolutely love it.
It's very enriching and enlightening, and I think just knowing about different cultural experiences, the diversity.
I have learned so much from some of the people.
Of course.
And as my husband would say, when we're in New London and we're out to dinner, you could tell, and it's true, I could tell by the way people walk. They could be a mile away. I could tell their walk. I just know who they are, whether they just got out of the hospital or they got out of somewhere else. And I always run over to them and leave my husband and say, hey, how are you doing? So tell me what's going on with you.
Right.
And they're just as interested in me or the people there, the other volunteers.
Absolutely.
They are, because we are their lives. And that night, they are our lives. And so it's a wonderful mix of people, and that's my enjoyment. I was saying to my husband the other day, once this pandemic is completely over and we're free, I will, of course, go back to the soup kitchen.
Of course you will.
And I still drop in, as you know.
I saw you
I drop
the
in.
other
I
day,
called
yes.
this morning. I said, Mark, I will probably be there. And he always hangs up and says, I love you. And
Aww.
always, because I have been I got him a job at the shelter also when he was working part-time at the soup kitchen. Now he has a full-time job at the soup kitchen. So we have become friends, and I've become friends with so many people through that.
Of course.
So that's my biggest volunteer. And then I was on a board, and I can't remember the name, and I'm no longer on it, in Stonington. And that was a board where we helped kids who were in trouble with the law. And I was on that since inception, since the day that started also. And again, I was the oldest one because people had dispersed and they were no longer the same people. I was the only person who was left. But I really didn't have the time because the meetings were at 3:30 in the afternoon, and it meant I had to leave work. If I was in the middle of a wedding consultation or doing a funeral, I just couldn't do it, and so I left. But that was wonderful. It was at Human Services in Stonington. And as I say, it was a group of people with a policeman, the person who had arrested the youngster. And then we talked to the parents and we talked to the youngster. And I think it was very helpful to the parents and to the youngster. They had this last chance before they went to juvenile court. We gave them one last chance. So that was very interesting.
And how was that in terms of being successful? How did that work?
I think it was very successful.
Good.
I think it was very successful. A lot of them were petty things, but they weren't petty when you think of this. If it continued, it wouldn't. Like I remember,
it becomes problematic. That's right, and the patterns get established.
Exactly.
It's just so important to do early intervention.
Exactly. Like I remember, we had 3 glorious girls who were just wonderful and beautiful, and they went into that new makeup shop in Waterford on the top of the hill, and they politely put some cosmetics in their pocket. Right. It was hard to believe because all of them came from well-to-do families in beautiful areas, and yet, why would you do this? It was for the fun of it.
Right.
So I think we scared them, so to speak, and to say this is really your last chance because you were arrested.
Right.
And so that was a wonderful group. So I would say I was there for 13 years.
Nice, yeah.
And let's see, and then I was on a religious board also, and then I was on another board, and that was the Waterford Food Locker, and we started that also.
What's that about?
That was a group of people who felt the need to have food ready for people in the Waterford area, Waterford and New London, and not East Lyme, who needed food. And so we borrowed a food locker in Waterford at a building,
I don't even know what a
a
food
municipal
locker
building.
is.
Well, that's what we called it, Waterford
Okay.
Food Locker. And we had some bureaus and things to keep food, and we would ask for donations. And we built up quite an array of food. And then the police and the town would let us know of a family who were in need of food. Where else would they go? So you might say, why don't they go to the soup kitchen? Well, they needed food at home, number one. And how would they schlep to the soup kitchen? How would they get there?
Transportation,
Exactly. So I did that for many years, and I was one of the starters of that. There were 3 religious groups that did it. And so 2 of us each month would get a call. So I was a member of Temple Emmanuel and still am. So Temple Emmanuel, let's say, would be January, and another church would be March. So we would do it that way, and then 2 people from each congregation would be called by the police or the town and say, this family needs food, when can you meet them? And then we would meet them, get the key from the town, open the locker, and give them a certain amount of food.
So it's kind of the same model that Karen Share has in East Lyme.
I guess I'm not aware of it, but that's probably it. So we did that. I did that for years and years and years, and I think that may still be taken over by some people. But so that was fun.
So Judy, tell me, why do you have this magnanimous spirit? I mean, you are all about giving and taking care of the other. I mean,
my mother was.
Tell me about that.
Well, my mother, I remember she used to do things for. It was called the 60+ Club.
Okay.
And of course, my mother was young. And so my mother always took people places, because my mother didn't work. She took people places. They had dinners, suppers, desserts, and my mother always did cooking.
Well, she worked, but she didn't get paid, probably.
Well, that's right. I shouldn't say that. That's right. She didn't have a job, but she took care of my dad, my sister, and I. That's correct.
Right.
But she always had time to take people. And then her own brother was born with not cerebral palsy. I think it was an old polio that he had. And so he had a bad limp, and he couldn't drive. He was also an epileptic, and he could not drive. But he did marry and have a son.
Nice.
But he couldn't drive, and she had come over from Europe, and she never learned English or how to drive.
You're her sister-in-law.
That's correct.
Okay.
My mother's brother and sister-in-law, who lived right in the town.
Okay.
So who did all the grocery shopping? Who did all the taking to doctor's offices? Who did everything?
Your mother.
My mother.
Right.
My mother had to do everything
Well, what
because
a great
they
role
didn't
model.
drive.
And what was her name?
Bill.
Bill.
It was Bill, Belle.
Oh, nice.
Bill. And so I guess I learned that from my mother.
Sounds like it.
And also my parents were extremely giving. I remember saying to my mother after we had an apartment and then we moved into a house, and I said, I hate the color of this refrigerator. I mean, it came with the house and it was yellow. And my mother said, and my parents were not well-to-do. My father worked very hard in the liquor business for 30 or 40 years, very hard. My mother said, you know what, buy a new refrigerator and stove to match. They didn't have the extra money, but they always were willing. And I remember another thing I said, I think the baby could use carpeting. My mother said, carpet the house. It'll be a birthday gift to you. So that's how my parents were. And so and my son would be the first to tell you, and my daughter-in-law, that I'm the same way with them. If my daughter-in-law came over the other day and she said, tell Seth when he gets through mowing your lawn to just go and grab some milk from the store down the street. So she said, here's the card, the debit card. I said, put the debit card away. I gave my son $25. I said, Mom, it's milk. I said, I don't care, put it in your pocket. So that's how I am, and I learned from my parents to be that way.
Nice.
And of course, I only have one child. Now here's a perfect example that my son learns from me. This is the end of this conversation about me, but I'm going to tell you. So my son was on vacation, and he came back at 3 o'clock in the morning 2 Saturdays ago. Sunday morning at 9 a.m., he was mowing our lawn.
Wow.
No one asked him. He came over and mowed our lawn.
Wow.
So that's the kind of person my son is. And the other is, he won a wonderful thing he's a teacher in North Stonington.
Nice.
And they named him something like Teacher of the Year.
Lovely.
Oh, they don't know. They gave him the yearbook was it was in honor of
dedicated
him.
To him.
They dedicated it to him.
Nice.
And one of the reasons is, besides the fact he's a great teacher, is he bakes. Before the pandemic, he baked every single day.
Wow.
And brought treats in for the kids. that was his way of giving to kids.
Absolutely.
And he loved to bake. Absolutely loved to bake. And so he brought things in, not once a week or twice a week. Every day he had something else to bring in. And so at the end, when the dedication was, the wonderful thing that they
And this is Seth?
Seth, and the wonderful thing that they put at the end, of the dedication was, and we loved all the food he brought, the desserts he brought.
Very sweet.
But the first time, he said, I'm going to make an apple pie for the kids, Mom. I said, okay, you know what? I have this dish I got at the secondhand store. It's in a pie shape, and it has a recipe for apple pie. So follow it. Well, I think it said maybe a quarter of a cup of brown sugar. He put 4 cups of brown sugar in. And I didn't know about it, but he said, Mom, the kids said it was kind of sweet. And I said, well, did you follow the directions? He said, it seemed like 4 cups was a lot. I said, 4 cups? It was a quarter. But that was his first baking experience. And so.
Does he know about 1/4?
I guess he didn't. He never knew measurements for baking.
So math is not his subject.
Was never his nor mine.
What does he teach?
He teaches civics.
Okay.
Social studies. As a matter of fact, his tutor in high school said, we built her kitchen with the money that we gave her for Seth. And I had my downstairs neighbor who was an engineer tutor me.
Oh.
So that's a generational thing in terms of math.
So math is not your forte.
No, but he's great with politics and social studies. And that was the other thing that in the dedication that they said he taught them a lot about the government and the political situation. And he was very careful not to go either way. But, he was very
astute, it sounds like.
He is very astute, and he loves history, and he also loves politics.
And he loves people, yes.
He does. So this is one more interesting fact about Seth. He played tennis the other day with one of his former students. Last night, he was at a restaurant with his former student, who is now a doctor, and her boyfriend. He has been in touch with at least, I'd say, 6 former students from all the years. He's taught for 19 years. He's been in touch with at least 4 to 5 students continually and sees them when they come home.
Nice.
And is in touch with him. So he knows how to carry on a relationship. There's
well, and
no
I think
doubt.
you do too. And I think the apple didn't fall too far from the tree.
I guess that's true.
You must be very proud. And
I'm very proud. He's my only child, and I'm very proud of him. And I have a wonderful daughter-in-law who is great, and 2 children and 2 grandchildren. And I'm happy. I'd like a little more time off if I could, but it doesn't matter. It makes me happy to keep busy and to do something that's worthwhile. And I always have socks. Last week I had socks. There's a secondhand store 2 doors down from my store, and they collect socks for me to give to the soup kitchen or the shelter.
nice.
So every week I bring in, and I actually forgot to bring them because I'm coming to New London, a big bag of socks. And the other one, I have a girl who is in Brownies, and she has people collecting cosmetics, shampoos and soaps. So there's always something that I'm bringing to the soup kitchen or the shelter.
So there's a need. It's not just food. It's mittens in the winter, hats,
That's right.
socks in the summer, maybe flip-flops, things like that.
Absolutely. I had a gal who, she worked for a lawyer, and she would have the law office knit hats every year.
Nice.
So there are all kinds of constants that I could bring up of kids and people who always give and keep giving.
And it feels good, right? At the end of the day, you feel like you're helping the humanity.
It does. But in addition to just helping, I love the interchange that we have and the chatting. And I am friendly with at least 2 people forever for the last 30 years.
Nice.
That started at the soup kitchen. They still eat at the soup kitchen, and I still talk to them. One of them is on my phone, and he calls me, I would say every 3rd day, to say, have a nice day, have a nice day, and tell Stephen to have a nice day.
Nice.
So,
well, Judy, you've been a marvelous guest. Thank you so much for being on my show today. Loved hearing your stories, and
thank you.
They're definitely stories worth sharing, so thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for asking me.
Yes. That's great.
You're clear.
Okay, you didn't have to worry about